Charles Coppel, who is our guest speaker this evening. As I said, he's a cousin of mine, and he's he's a former member of the Victorian Bar who deserted the law for academia and became a professor of Indonesian at Melbourne University. So I think I probably don't need any more introduction, Charles, than that. Can I invite you to speak?
Thank you very much, Gavin. I too acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands we're joining this Zoom from and pay my respects to elders past and present. In March 2006, I talked to the Genealogical Society on the Coppel and Berrick families, watchmakers, Liverpool and Krakow. At that time, I'd just discovered not only the 1823 birth registration of my great-grandfather, Elias Coppel, in Krakow, but the names of his parents and grandparents. I concluded that talk by saying, in the last week, we have opened up the Krakow origins of the Coppel family. The task of tracing the Berricks back to Poland will, of course, be more difficult, as we don't even know where in Poland they came from. But the success of the Coppel search gives us cautious grounds for optimism. Today, nearly 20 years later, my focus is on the Berricks. I'll start with Lewin Berrick, brother of Elias Coppel's wife, Sarah Amelia. When the watchmaker Lewin Berrick wed Teresa Nathan on the 25th of November 1857, it was the second Jewish marriage in Ballarat. The marriage certificate shows that Lewin and Teresa were both born in the English city of Liverpool. Lewin's parents were Barnard and Paulina Berrick. Teresa's were Philip and Rosina Nathan. The two witnesses were Charles Dyte, Teresa's brother-in-law, and Elias Coppel, Lewin's brother-in-law. How did this Liverpool couple come to be married in Ballarat as early as 1857? Just 3 weeks earlier, the clipper Morning Light had arrived in Melbourne after a 3-month voyage from Liverpool. The first-class cabin included a group of passengers comprising Teresa Nathan, Lewin's bride-to-be, her sister Eve, or Evelina, who was rejoining her husband Charles Dyte with their 4-year-old son David, and Elias Coppel with his wife Sarah Amelia, Lewin Berrick's sister, and their 1-year-old daughter Carolyn. The Ballarat marriage symbolised an alliance between the Berrick, Nathan and Coppel families, who are all Jewish watchmakers in Liverpool. I've included another Nathan sister, Miriam, whose husband Godfrey Levi was a brother of the famous Nathaniel Levi, the first Jew to sit in the Victorian Parliament. Barnard Berrick was a witness to their 1851 marriage in the Liverpool Seal Street Synagogue. Elias Coppel was a watchmaker born in Krakow. His uncle Zalel Coppel, also Krakow-born, was a leading watchmaker in Liverpool. Charles Dyte's wife Eve and her sister Teresa, the bride, were daughters of the Liverpool watchmaker Philip Nathan, who died in 1838 and had an established business at 25 Castle Street. Their mother Rosina and brother Mosley continued as watchmakers after his death. The bridegroom, Lewin Berrick, and his sister Sarah Amelia Coppel were children of the Liverpool watchmaker Barnard Berrick. Barnard's business was at 19 Great Howard Street. These three families, Berrick, Nathan and Coppel, were all members of the Liverpool Hebrew congregation with its synagogue in Seal Street. News of the discovery of gold in Victoria must have engendered considerable excitement among these families in Liverpool. Elias Coppel, Lewin Berrick and Charles Dyte were early participants in the gold rush. Elias Coppel first arrived in Melbourne on the Merlin in September 1852. His grandson, Sid Coppel, said he made rings for the diggers. The prospects in the colony were good. When he boarded the Eagle for Liverpool in June 1854, the ship carried 80,000 ounces of gold and 35,000 gold sovereigns. At today's prices, this would be worth about 242 million Australian dollars for the gold and about 25 million Australian dollars for the gold content of the sovereigns, let alone their collector's value. Charles Dyte arrived in Melbourne on the Vernon on 28th of August 1853, having left behind his pregnant wife Eve with their two daughters, Hannah and Rosina. Just 10 days after his arrival in Melbourne, their son David was born in Liverpool on the 7th of September 1853. The flamboyant Dite soon became very prominent in Ballarat, but that's a story I can't pursue here. When Eve arrived on the Morning Light in 1857 to join him after a 4-year separation, he set eyes on his son for the first time. Sadly, both daughters had died in Liverpool in June 1856. I haven't established when Lewin Berrick himself arrived on his first exploratory visit to Victoria. He was already listed as a watchmaker in Liverpool in the 1851 census and in the 1853 Gore Liverpool Directory. I can say that he left Melbourne to return to Liverpool on the Red Jacket in April 1855. Did he meet Elias Coppel or Charles Dite while he was in Victoria? It's impossible to prove, but it's highly likely. Not only were they to be witnesses to his marriage in 1857, Coppel was by then his brother-in-law and Dite was the brother-in-law of his wife, Teresa. The decision by Lewin Berrick and Elias Coppel to return to Melbourne and settle there suggests, of course, that they were optimistic about the prospects. The news of all that gold must have helped persuade Lewin's watchmaker and jeweller father, Barnard Berrick, to agree to his 18-year-old daughter, Sarah Amelia, marrying Elias on 13th of February 1856, while she was still a minor. This was no small thing. She was their third living child, but was the first to marry. Moreover, although her husband Elias Coppel's uncle Zalel had been living in Liverpool for as long as her parents, Elias himself was a very recent immigrant and a draft dodger. In January 1850, he was included in a list of young Jewish men called up for military service by the Austrian government after its forcible annexation of Krakow in 1846. I assume he must have taken refuge with his uncle in Liverpool to avoid the draft. Lewin Berrick was evidently in Liverpool when Elias married his sister, but he left on the White Star in August 1856 with his younger brother Lesser before their first child Carolyn was born. She must have celebrated her first birthday during the voyage to Melbourne on the Morning Light. Barnard and Paulina Berrick had to say farewell to Lewin, their eldest son, Sarah Amelia, their eldest living daughter, and Caroline, their first grandchild, when they left to settle in Australia. This parting also meant that they were absent from Lewin's marriage in Ballarat. Given the length of time taken by voyages between Liverpool and Melbourne by sailing ship in that era, it's quite remarkable that Lewin Berrick and his sister Sarah Amelia could both have emigrated and established families so soon after the discovery of gold in Victoria. They went on to have large Australian families with many descendants, some of whom are with us this evening. They were not the only members of the family to be pioneers. Their brothers George, Lesser and Joseph would later establish the import-export business of Berrick Brothers in 1868. Soon afterwards, they set up an office in Yokohama. Joseph, the youngest, died there on the 26th of October 1896. George died in England in the same year. Lesser's son Bertram Robert Berrick took over the business in Yokohama. His house was destroyed in the Great Kanto earthquake of 1923, but in 1930 he built the house now known as Berrick Hall, which has become a tourist destination in Yokohama. He moved to Canada in 1940, just before the outbreak of the Pacific War. The purpose of this paper, however, is to discuss what we know, or think we know, about the Berrick family in Liverpool and to find its roots in Poland. In the mid-19th century, the population of Liverpool grew rapidly to make it the largest provincial city in England. A major contributor to this was the enormous influx in the late 1840s of Irish survivors of the potato famine. It's been claimed that at its peak, 40% of the world's trade passed through the Liverpool docks. It was also a major port of departure for emigrants to America. The Liverpool Hebrew congregation was formed in about 1780 and erected its synagogue in Seal Street in about 1807. It came to be known informally as the Liverpool Old Hebrew Congregation to distinguish it from the Liverpool New Hebrew Congregation, which broke away in 1838. We're very fortunate that the Liverpool Record Office, which is run by the Liverpool City Council, holds extensive Jewish community archives, including records of the Liverpool Hebrew congregation, the old one. The synagogue registers of births, deaths, and marriages, including details in Hebrew, are available for decades before the introduction of civil registration in 1837. For example, here is Lewin Berrick's birth, giving his Hebrew name as Yehuda Leib ben Berrick Tzvi. And here is Teresa Nathan's birth with her Hebrew name as Rezel bat Ari Shraga Halevi. I return now to the Seal Street Synagogue. According to the Liverpool Record Office catalogue, the Seal Street Synagogue was the first in Anglo Jewry which gave English sermons, and also the first in 1836 to appoint a regular preacher in an Anglo-Jewish traditional synagogue. Seal Street Synagogue was also the pioneer in Anglo-Jewish synagogues for choral singing. This tradition was initiated by the Reverend Joseph Prague, who took up the position in 1850. By the early 1850s, Lewin Berrick's father, Barnard Berrick, was a significant figure in this congregation. As a free member, he was entitled to be elected to office and to vote in elections. Restriction on access to the right to enjoy this privilege was one of the main reasons for the split in the Liverpool Hebrew congregation that led to the exodus of members to form the Liverpool New Hebrew congregation. In the early 1850s, Barnard was a member of the old congregation select committee. In 1850-51, he was chosen as junior treasurer, and in the following year as senior treasurer. In 1854, he tied for the post of junior warden, sort of equivalent to a vice president, if you like, but he lost on the casting vote of the chairman of the special meeting called to elect the senior officers. The chairman voted for Henry Hess, who belonged to an old Liverpool family, rather than having somebody who was a first-generation immigrant. A ground plan of the Seal Street Synagogue on the 16th of January 1866 shows Barnard's seat as number 1 up in the top left-hand corner. I don't read this as his ranking in the congregation. His payment of 6 guineas is by no means the largest, but his seat is nonetheless in a prominent position. His wife's seat in the gallery is number 33, diagonally opposite. By this time, the synagogue was thought too small and unimpressive for the growing number and wealth of members of the congregation. Funds were raised, and the result was its replacement by the extraordinarily impressive Prince's Road Synagogue, which was consecrated in 1874. Although he was still alive, Barnard Berrick doesn't appear on the donation board in the foyer. He was widowed in 1868 and in 1871 was living with his son Lesser and daughter Hannah. Lesser is clearly the L. Berrick who is on the donation board. He gave £2. L. Coppel donated 5. The Moorish revival style Prince's Road Shul has been described as the most lavish high Victorian synagogue in England. It was built in the Liverpool neighbourhood of Toxteth. To quote Wikipedia, this was in a period when Liverpool's magnates were filling Toxteth with opulent mansions. The synagogue is in a neighbourhood of substantial homes and in a cluster of houses of worship designed to advertise the wealth and status of a group of captains of industry that was remarkably ethnically diverse by the standards of Victorian England. Nearby can be found the high Victorian Gothic Welsh Presbyterian Church, built between 1865 and 67, and the Neo-Byzantine Greek Orthodox Church of St. Nicholas, completed in 1870. Remarkably, the Prince's Road Shul, which recently celebrated its 150th anniversary, was designed by the same local non-Jewish architects who designed the Welsh Presbyterian Church. Today, the Al-Rahma Mosque, which can accommodate more than 2,000 worshippers, built a century later, also stands nearby. The Seal Street Shul no longer exists, but a plaque marks where it used to stand. Barnard died the following year on 30th December 1875. He was buried in the Dean Road Cemetery. The Dean Road Cemetery is the oldest surviving Jewish cemetery in Liverpool. It was established by the Liverpool Hebrew Congregation in 1837 and and after its consecration, the first burials occurred in September 1837. By the early 20th century, it was full and burials ceased. Over time, it fell into serious disrepair and became derelict. It was only restored and reconsecrated in the present century with funds from the National Lottery. It contains the gravestones of Lewin Berrick's parents, Barnard and Paulina Berrick. There they are. Unlike the civil registration death records available from the General Records Office, the GRO, the inscriptions, of course, on the gravestones give the Hebrew as well as the English names. We learn here that Barnard's Hebrew name was Baruch bar Eliezer and Paulina's was Pesa bat Shlomo. The cemetery also contains the gravestones of Sloman and Hannah Berrick, Paulina's parents. Sloman Berrick died on 17th of November 1856. His Hebrew name was Shlomo ben Mo Dov Berish. I owe this reading to Saul Marks in Liverpool, who kindly photographed the gravestones for me. The burial record given by the Jewish Gen Online Worldwide Burial Registry gives his name only as Shlomo ben Dov. Their omission of the name Berish is unfortunate, as it will be important to my argument later. Hannah Berrick died on 18th of January 1847. Her Hebrew name was Hinda. Unfortunately, the top right-hand corner of her gravestone has sheared off, as you can see, taking with it several words, including her father's name. As Paulina's parents, Sloman and Hannah Berrick were the maternal grandparents of Lewin and Sarah Amelia. I shall return to them later. Before I leave the Dean Road Cemetery, I'll mention two other people buried there. The first is Philip Nathan, father of Teresa and thus Lewin Berrick's father-in-law. Philip Nathan died on the 25th of November 1838, making him one of the earliest people to be buried in the cemetery. His Hebrew name was Shraga ben Ezekiel. The other is Zalel Coppel, uncle of Elias Coppel, whose wife Sarah Amelia Berrick was Lewin's sister. He died on 28th of September 1886. His Hebrew name was Bezalel ben Yaakov Halevi. I return now to Lewin's father, Barnard Berrick. He was also prominent as a watchmaker and jeweller. He first appears identifiably in Gore's Liverpool Directory in 1835 as a jeweller at 19 Leander Street. From 1837 right through to 1871, he can be found at different addresses in Great Howard Street. His stated occupation also varies, initially as a jeweller, then usually as a watchmaker, sometimes with a sideline as an outfitter or tailor and draper, or as a general dealer. From 1873 until his death, he appears as, quote, a gentleman, living with his son Lesser at 25 Berkeley Street. Until 1844, naturalisation of aliens in England was only possible by means of a special Act of Parliament. The law was then amended to make the process cheaper and less cumbersome, so that it could be granted by certificate of the Home Secretary. With a few exceptions, the successful applicant acquired the rights and capacities of a natural-born British subject. Barnard Berrick and Zalel Coppel were among the earliest to take advantage of the new procedure. In his memorial to the Home Secretary in 1852, and you've got a piece of it there, Barnard declared he was a Jew born in Poland and was now aged 48, would make him born in 1804. He was a watchmaker by trade. He was married and had 7 children in Liverpool. He had resided in Liverpool for 28 years, so he must have arrived there in 1824 by that measure, and he had carried on business in Great Howard Street for the last 16 years. It's frustrating for my purposes that Barnard didn't specify, either here or elsewhere, for example in the census returns, in what part of Poland he was born. I shall return to Barnard Berrick's family, in other words, Lewin's parents and siblings in Liverpool. The 1851 Liverpool census records that Barnard was living with Paulina, also born in Poland, and their 7 surviving children, all born in Liverpool, at 19 to 21 Great Howard Street. This confirms what he said in his naturalisation application, but of course the census gives additional information. Lewin, then aged 18, was already described as a watchmaker, for example. The three oldest children were born before civil registration of births began, which was on the 1st of July 1837. In the case of Sarah Amelia, this must have been only by a matter of weeks. Using the Liverpool Hebrew congregation records, I can present the household here as a family tree. If you're observant, you'll see along the bottom there that I've included 9 children rather than 7. 2 were absent from the census. One of them, Maria Mary, must have died earlier. The other is Sophia, the eldest, born on 15th of January 1831. Because there's no sign of her in the census of 1841, let alone 1851, I assume she must have died in childhood, although I haven't been able to trace a death register entry for her, at least not yet. Lesser, the first of the children born after the introduction of civil registration of births, was born on 17th of September 1839. The birth certificate from the GRO shows that his mother's maiden name was also Berrick. When I first saw it, I speculated, and I wasn't alone in this, that Barnard and Paulina were cousins. This speculation was based on their anglicised Berrick family names. Examination of their Hebrew names may cast some doubt on it, as we shall see, but it's impossible to prove they were related or unrelated. I can take Barnard's ancestry back no further than appears from his Hebrew name. This discloses that his father's given name was Eliezer. According to his gravestone, Barnard was Baruch bar Eliezer. His marriage register entry says Baruch Tzvi ben Eliezer, and the birth register entry for his son Lewin says it was Baruch Tzvi ben Eliezer. Perhaps Eliezer's father may have been a Baruch or a Berrick or a Berek, and this was the source of Barnard's Berrick family name. We're better served in the case of Lewin's mother, Paulina Berrick. Her Hebrew name was Pesa bat Shlomo. Her father, Sloman Berrick's Hebrew name was Shlomo ben Modov Berish, on the reading of the gravestone inscription given to me by Saul Marks. This suggests to me that the source of Sloman Berrick's family name was Berish. Both Berrick families, if there are 2, claim to come from Poland, but neither family was more precise than this. We know no more about Barnard's father than that his name was Eliezer. It's a tall order to establish a connection to a particular place in Poland with no more to go on than a guess that Barnard's grandfather had a name that may have sounded like Baruch or Berrick. On Paulina's side, we do at least know that her grandfather was Dov Berish. I'll try to make a case, which I hope is more than a plausible theory, that her family came from Krakow, like the Coppels. Before I do so, there's some more to tell about the Berricks in Liverpool. Here we're on firmer ground. Lewin's parents, Barnard and Paulina, were married in Liverpool on the 6th of January 1830. We know this from an entry in the Liverpool Hebrew Congregation marriage register, which spans 2 facing pages, with cursive Hebrew writing on the left and English on the right. This is a fascinating and in some respects an odd document. Their marriage is on the first 2 lines of both pages. Taking the English right-hand page first, on the first line the groom is called Barnard, not Barnard Berrick as we would expect from almost every other source. His parents' names are Lazarus and Sarah Barnard. Lazarus is another version of Eliezer. The abode is Whitechapel, the Liverpool Whitechapel, not the one on your Monopoly boards. On the second line, the bride is Paulina Berrick, whose parents are Solomon and Hannah Berrick of Sydney Street, Liverpool. Turning to the Hebrew left-hand page, I'm reliant on information from Saul Marks again. He tells me that on the first line, the name of the groom is given as Baruch Tzvi ben Eliezer, with parents' names as Eliezer and Sarah. The second line is again odd. It seems that Asher Ansel, the secretary of the Liverpool Hebrew congregation, has mistakenly entered the bride's name and her parents' names in the wrong columns. On this assumption, the bride's name is Pesa bat Shlomo and her parents were Shlomo and Hind, probably Hinda. The interest of these marriage register pages doesn't stop there. In the following 2 lines, we find on the same date the marriage of Israel Barnett son of Henry of Whitechapel, to Julia Berrick, daughter of Solomon and Hannah Berrick of Sydney Street. In other words, Sloman Berrick's daughters, Paulina and Julia, were married in the congregation on the same day. On the Hebrew left-hand page, we find on the first line that the Hebrew name of Julia's husband is Israel Baruch ben Tzvi, with parents' name Tzvi. On the second line, the bride's Hebrew name is given as possibly Yare bat Shlomo, with parents Shlomo and Hinda. It's curious that the name of the groom's mother is not given in either the English or the Hebrew versions. We're faced with several puzzles here. The first is different spellings of names. Looking through the records, we can find all sorts of variations of Barnett with one or two T's, Barnard and Bernard. There may be more. They can be used interchangeably. The second Barnett in Barnett in the marriage record must be a clerical error. The only other source of which I'm aware to call him Barnett is the birth registration of his daughter Sophia, also entered by the same secretary, Asher Ansel. In every other source, in censuses, trade directories, Hebrew congregation records, his naturalization application, the family name of his children, and the inscription on his gravestone, he's Berrick, not Barnett. These two exceptions happen to be the only Berrick register entries where the scribe was Ansel. There's also a mystery and confusion about the identity of the man who married Paulina's sister Julia. This was Israel Barnett, or in Hebrew, Israel Baruch ben Tzvi. I initially fell into the trap, understandably enough, that he was the same person as Israel Barnard, a banker and leader of the Jewish community in Liverpool. Saul Marks again, who's researched his family, assures me that this man was born in Portsmouth and in 1811 married Amelia Mosley, also with Portsmouth connections in Liverpool, and they remained married until her death in 1856. It's quite certain that he was not the Israel Barnett who married Julia Berrick in 1830. The two men who married the Berrick sisters on 6th of January 1830 were also in a business partnership. They're listed in Gore's Liverpool directory in 1829 as Barnard and Berrick Jewellers, 1 Manchester Street. The business doesn't appear elsewhere in the Gore directory before or after the wedding. The business partnership was evidently brief, since as far as I can tell, it was insolvent at the time of the marriage. In the London Gazette, 9th of March 1830, there are 2 entries that mention Israel Barnard and Barnard Berrick, formerly of Manchester Street and late of Whitechapel, both in Liverpool. These say that they're in partnership as watchmakers and jewellers under the firm of Barnard and Berrick. The same notices appear in the Law Advertiser in the section on insolvent debtors applying to be discharged between the 1st of January and the 30th of June 1830, the period in which the double wedding took place. It's conceivable but speculative to suggest that the 2 men may also have been related to each other. We really only have the sketchiest knowledge of Israel Barnett or his wife Julia Berrick, for that matter. The birth register records show that they had 3 children, Sophia, Henry, and Lewis, or Lewin. Barnard and Paulina also had 3 children in the same 4-year period, Sophia, Lewin, and George Barnard. Barnard and Paulina evidently named their children after their deceased grandparents following the Ashkenazic tradition. Lesser is named after his paternal grandfather Eliezer, who presumably must have died between 1835 and 1839. Sarah Amelia was named after her paternal grandmother Sarah, who must have died on the same basis between 1831 and 1837. And Hannah Rebecca was named after her grandmother Hannah, who died just before she was born in 1847. None of the children was named after their grandfather Sloman, because he was still alive when the youngest child, Joseph, was born. Similarly, Julia's first son was named after his paternal grandfather, Henry. The choice by both Paulina and her sister Julia to name their first daughter, Sophia, remains a puzzle at this stage. So does the choice of Lewin or Lewis as Paulina's first and Julia's second son. After the birth of their third child, Israel and Julia Barnett and their family totally vanish from the record. They don't appear in either the 1841 or 1851 census, and there is no record I can find of their death. The most likely explanation is that they emigrated, but I've found no evidence of that either. We'll have to leave that matter there. After this digression, I return to the question, where did these Berrick Liverpool families come from? From the completed census enumeration forms collected from the Berrick household at 19 to 21 Great Howard Street after 30th of March 1851, we learn that Lewin's parents both said they were born in Poland. By not identifying their birthplace more specifically, the Berricks were following the census instructions. For a person born outside England and Wales, only the country was to be given. Whether or not Paulina and Barnard were related, I think we can say with some confidence that they must have been born in the same place in Poland. The entire 1851 England census doesn't contain a single Berrick born in Poland other than those we know to be members of these Liverpool families. You might want to object that this could be mere coincidence, and to say that Barnard and Paulina might have been born in different places in Poland. This seems to me to stretch coincidence beyond reason. These Liverpool Berrick families are the only two Poland-born Berricks in England in 1851. They arrived in Liverpool at around the same time. They were members of the same Liverpool Hebrew congregation, and Barnard from one Berrick family married Paulina from the other in the same congregation. As I've explained, the difficulties of tracing Barnard's specific Polish place of origin seem insurmountable. I shall now try to make the case that it's possible, if not probable, that Paulina came with her family from Krakow. If that is the case, then Barnard too must have come from Krakow, on the reasoning I've just put. When people like the Berricks said in the mid-19th century that they were born in Poland, what did they mean? In answering this question, I hope to avoid a lengthy digression into the complex history of Poland in the 18th and 19th centuries. In short, the former Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth underwent a series of partitions engineered by three neighbouring states: the Austrian Habsburg monarchy, the Kingdom of Prussia, and the Russian Empire. This elimination of Polish sovereignty was disturbed by the advance and retreat of Napoleon's forces, but was substantially restored by the 1815 Congress of Vienna after his defeat. I suggest that Poland, for the Berricks, was the territory of the former Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth that was by now divided into Prussian Poland, Russian or Congress Poland, and Austrian Poland, basically Galicia. The latter would include Krakow, which was an autonomous city-state from 1815 to 1846 when it was annexed by Austria. You'll recall, I hope, that the Hebrew name of the grandfather of Lewin Berrick's mother, Paulina Berrick, was Shlomo ben Modov Berish. Using the Jewish Gen Family Finder, I found 4 other people with an interest in the name Berish somewhere in Poland. 2 of them specified Krakow, the other 2 only had Poland. Nobody specified any other place in Poland. The only one who responded to me, David Zeidman from England, was one of the latter, but he too turned out to have the Krakow connection, so that makes 3 of the 4 that we know of. This outcome and the lack of evidence of any alternative has emboldened me to consider the possibility that Paulina's Berrick family were, like the Coppels, from Krakow. Zalel Coppel was undoubtedly from Krakow, and we know from their naturalisation applications that he arrived in Liverpool at about the same time as Barnard Berrick. If both families did come from Krakow, this would at least be consistent with the phenomenon of chain migration. Barnard and Paulina Berrick had 9 children. The 18-year-old Sarah Amelia was the first to marry. Was a golden future in Victoria enough to persuade them to consent to her marriage to the draft-dodging Krakow immigrant Elias Coppel and to spend the rest of her life on the other side of the world. Charles Coppel was well known to them in the old Liverpool Hebrew congregation. You can actually find him on that same ground plan that I showed before of the congregation. If Paulina's Berrick or Berrish family was from Krakow, that could have been an additional reason to make his nephew Elias acceptable as a son-in-law. It was unusual for children of Barnard and Paulina to marry an immigrant. Of the 6 who married, Sarah Amelia is the only one who did so in Paulina's lifetime. The others all married English-born. True, her sister Fanny, younger sister, married the Hamburg-born Henry Gedalia Frankel 13 years later in 1869, but that was actually a year after Paulina's death. None of this proves the Krakow connection, of course. To establish a Krakow origin of Paulina's family, I would ideally need to find evidence at the relevant time of the birth of her father Shlomo and evidence of the existence of his father Dov Berish. I can't yet meet that standard of proof, but I believe I have sufficient evidence to make a plausible if tentative case. I've discovered that a certain David Berish witnessed 4 marriages in Krakow between the 17th of March and 3rd of April 1805. You can see two of them on this 2-page facing thing from the Krakow marriage register in 1805. Paulina's father Shlomo died in 1856 at the age of 78, implying that he was born in about 1778. His father Dov Berish would certainly have been of a suitable age to witness these marriages in 1805. But we can't prove that he was this Krakow witness, David Berish. Dan Hirschberg, the preeminent authority for Jewish genealogy in Krakow, has identified more than 700 family trees in Krakow with roots before 1800. One is a Berish family with variant spellings, B-R-I-S-C-H, B-R-Y-S-Z, Berush, Berish, Berish, and so on. The tree covers 4 generations, and it starts with an Isaac Berish and his wife Esther. Unfortunately, the tree does not contain the David Berish who witnessed the 4 Krakow marriages in 1805. However, because of the incompleteness of the surviving records, this certainly doesn't mean he was unrelated. We can't prove that he was related either. There are, however, 2 members of the family who were given the name David, who died in infancy, one in 1848, the other in 1885. This suggests that there may have been an earlier David in the family after whom they were named, but we don't have that name in the family tree that Dan Hirschberg provides. On the basis of the available vital records, we know that the family patriarch, Isaac Berish, died on 29th of January 1835. According to his death certificate, he was aged 50, implying that he was born in about 1785. However, there are conflicting declarations of his age that he made when registering the births of his children, so he could have been born as early as 1779. In other words, Isaac Berish was a contemporary of Paulina's father Sloman Berrick, or Shlomo. For all we know, they could have been brothers, and David or Dov Berish their father. There are no extant records from that period that can throw light on this. The best that we can say is that it's possible such a relationship existed between Paulina's Berrick family in Liverpool and the Berish family in Krakow. Let me return briefly to the question of whether Paulina's family was related to Barnard's family independently of their marriage to each other. We can't rule out the possibility that Barnard's father Eliezer was a brother of Paulina's brother Sloman. If so, Barnard and Paulina would have been first cousins. First cousin marriages were not unknown in small Jewish communities at that time. In such a case, how do we explain the Berrick or Baruch on Barnard's side and the Berish on Paulina's side? One of the pages on Dan Hirschberg's remarkable website is about equivalent names. He says that there is an unofficial equivalence between the given names Berish and Berrick. Even if on this basis we were to assume, which I'm certainly not, that Eliezer and Sloman were brothers, it would take us no further in establishing a connection with the Berrick family in Krakow. This is not quite the end of the story, however. There is a later Berrick connection between Krakow and Liverpool. It doesn't go directly to the question of the Polish origins of the Berricks, but it's a tantalizing source of conjecture. I began this talk with the Ballarat marriage of Lewin Berrick and Teresa Nathan on the 25th of November 1857. It was a marriage which linked those three Liverpool families, the Berricks, the Nathans and the Coppels. Within the space of the next year, there were two related marriages celebrated in Liverpool in which all the participants were from Krakow. Together, they give us a link to the Liverpool Old Hebrew congregation and the Berrick family in Krakow that we have from Dan Hirschberg. The first marriage on 24th of March 1858 was between the Krakow-born dentist Solomon Loewenstaeck and Jane Hannah Prager. It was solemnized at the Seal Street Shul of the Liverpool Old Hebrew congregation or under its auspices. The second marriage on the 26th of October 1858 was between Jane's older brother, William Ezekiel Prager, a working jeweller, and Fanny Berrick. One of the witnesses was Jane's now husband, Solomon Loewenstaeck. This marriage was, however, celebrated in the Liverpool Register Office. The second marriage certificate, which you have on screen, tells us that Fanny was aged 18 and illiterate. She signed with a cross. Her father was Israel Berrick, a tailor. Fanny's Krakow birth certificate shows that she was born on 28th of April 1840 to Israel Moses Berrick, a musician at that time, and his wife Hannah, and was named Fegler. When she was 8 years old, Fanny's father Israel, by then a tailor, died in Krakow at the age of 28. We may not be able to establish a relationship between Paulina's Berrick family and the Krakow family headed by Isaac Berrick, although we've seen that this is possible, but the connection of Fanny or Fegler to it is indisputable. Her father Israel was Isaac's son, and she was Isaac's granddaughter. It's intriguing that unlike the earlier marriage in March, Fanny's marriage in Liverpool to the jeweller Ezekiel William Prager was not Jewish. It's inconceivable to me that the Berrick, Nathan and Coppel families had no knowledge of the Prager siblings and their spouses. Jane's marriage was in their Liverpool Old Hebrew congregation. The men were all in closely related occupations, watchmaking, jewellery and dentistry. There is much that we don't know. How did it come about that the 18-year-old illiterate Krakow-born Fanny or Fegler married in Liverpool? Why did she and her husband William not have a Jewish wedding like his sister? Did they elope from Krakow? Plenty of questions. Like Fanny Berrick, Sarah Amelia Berrick was 18 when she married Elias Coppel in 1856. Perhaps Fanny couldn't have a Jewish wedding because, unlike Sarah Amelia, she no longer had a living father to give his consent. I find myself at a crossroads here. As historian and genealogist, I can only pose hypotheses, keeping questions open while noting that circumstantial evidence points me in a certain direction. If I was writing a novel, I could leap in and tell the story, filling in the gaps consistently with what I know. Putting on my novelist's hat, I'll try to put myself into the position of Paulina Berrick in Liverpool. In late 1857, she must have been grieving severely. Her eldest son, Lewin, had emigrated to Australia a year earlier, just a few months before the death of her father, Sloman. Her oldest surviving daughter, Sarah Amelia, her new son-in-law, Elias, and her only grandchild so far, baby Carolyn, had also just emigrated to Australia. She probably had no expectation that she would ever see any of them again or any future grandchildren who might be born in Australia. Then in 1858, Fanny Berrick turns up in Liverpool from Krakow. Paulina could have been a cousin of Fanny's father Israel. Paulina finds solace in reconnecting with her Krakow Berrick family through Fanny. I have no evidence of this, of course, but it's not inconsistent with the evidence I have. Let me end with one intriguing fact. Fanny Prager, née Berrick, and her husband William Ezekiel Prager had their first child in Liverpool on the 26th of November 1859. They named her Amelia. Could this have been a nod to Paulina's missing Sarah Amelia? And that's where I'll leave it, but I'd like to acknowledge the assistance that I've had from many people over 2 decades, and I apologise to anyone who I've overlooked in this list. I'd also like to show on the next slide important references for those unfamiliar with the Jewish genealogy and history in Krakow, because there are 2 very important sources there. Thank you very much.
Yep. Thank you, Charles. Just before I ask for any questions, how many descendants of the Berrick family of Liverpool are there in Australia today?
How many are there?
Yes.
In Australia.
Yes.
In Australia.
Yes.
I'm not sure how many, but there are a number of them who I think are present on Zoom this evening. I managed to get in touch with them. The main lines that I know of are the descendants of Joel Fredman, the older, that is, and Miriam Berrick. That leads 2 generations on to the brothers Lionel, who I think was the first honorary secretary of this society, his brother
Yes.
Malcolm, both of them since deceased, and Clive,
Yes.
who I believe is with us tonight. I think I saw him tuning in earlier.
Yes.
In recent days, there's been contact made with the children of all 3 of those brothers. So there are quite a number of them there. There's
Yes.
also another line that comes from Lewin, which includes John Berrick and his son Anthony, who I think John is online this evening, if I'm not mistaken. Maybe Anthony too. There may well be others. There are also many of the descendants of the Coppel marriage between Elias Coppel and Sarah Amelia Berrick,
Yes.
numbers of whom are here, apart from my own immediate family. But you will know that 3 of the Coppel children of Elias and Sarah Amelia married Abraham siblings who were, you mentioned Kira Quinn Lockyer's book
Yes.
on the early days of the Ballarat goldfields. Sidney Abraham
Yes.
was another major watch and clockmaker in Ballarat, and he and his wife Rebecca Crocker had a huge family, and 3 of the Coppel siblings married 3 of the Abraham siblings, and another 3
Yes.
of the Coppel siblings married 3 of the
Cohen.
Cohen siblings.
Yes.
So we
Yes.
are multiply related through
Yes.
those sources. I once described this as inbred in, I think, an article in the Jewish Historical Society. I stand with that.
Are there people still with the Berrick surname?
Yes, John Berrick and Anthony Berrick I know of, and I've been
Yes.
in touch with both of them, but I've not met them.
Where are they?
I think in New South Wales, if I recall.
Right.
I was put in
Right.
touch with them by Kira
Yes.
Lockyer, actually.
Sydney, actually.
And what about in Liverpool? Are there still descendants in Liverpool?
There are just, well, there's the other line that went, I mean, the Japan connection. A lot of
Yes.
those, there are descendants, I think, of Lesser Berrick, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes.
And there's the George Bernard Berrick, who was the last one of them in Yokohama, who went to Canada, I think,
Yes.
then came to Australia, and there are descendants of his, I believe. And I mentioned the younger sister, was it Hannah? I forget, who married a Frankel, and there are descendants of theirs, I believe, in England, but that is not with the surname Berrick.
Yes.
The only ones I can think of who got the surname Berrick are John and Anthony, but I may have insufficient information here.
Yes, thank you. Now, is there anyone who'd like to ask a question of Charles in relation to that magnificent piece of genealogical research, which is extremely impressive? Is there anybody who? Yes, I can see Professor Leon Mann there. Go for it.
Yeah. There's a Coppel Street in Melbourne. Is that your family?
If it is, I don't know what the origin of its naming was, Leon. There are a lot of Coppels, and part of the story there is that three of the numerous children of Elias and Sarah Amelia married out, and so were lost to the family. Elias took a very dim view of this and cut them out completely. They're completely out. They were not named in his will. And so I've been in touch with some of them. In fact, one or two of the descendants of those may be actually with us online this evening, because I've been sending around word about this talk to as many of the descendants of the families as I can locate. And one of the pleasures of doing this is to rejoin various broken links in family chains. So yeah, Leon, I don't know the answer to your question.
Actually, it's
it
Coppel
would be
Court.
surprising if it was anything else.
Yep.
If the name has been there for a long time. There are Coppels in Australia who are unrelated to my family, but I think they are more recent arrivals than the naming of that street would probably be from.
Well, Coppel Court is
I think they are,
Blackburn
Charles.
South.
I think they're more recent. They're post-war families of Coppels.
Well, that's Blackburn South. Blackburn South must be somewhere near Monash. Coppel Court.
Yes.
Yeah, Coppel Court is in Blackburn,
Yes, sir.
about 500 metres from where my sister and I grew up. And we always passed it and wondered about it, but that area was developed in the 50s and 60s, 1950s and 60s. So there's a whole bunch of Coppels out of the Liverpool area as well who are not Jewish. Steve Coppel was a famous Liverpool soccer player back in the 1980s. So I never thought that was part of the family's history.
Maybe they married up.
No, Steve Coppel, that mob, they're way back. It's not connected to the Jewish Coppels.
Okay.
Zalel is the first Coppel who arrived in England. Elias's
That
uncle.
we know of. Yeah.
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 Well, there's no other
Yes.
evidence of another one.
Anyone else with a question to ask Charles?
Hello.
Yes.
Sorry, who's speaking?
I was just asking if there are any questions.
There are some questions here on chat. Let me just see if I can read. Ayana has asked, did you check if the surname Berrick is in the surname dictionary of Poland by Alexander Bida? He provides possible geographic zones. No, I haven't. Sorry, I'm grateful for that suggestion. I'll look it up.
And Michael above.
Michael Abramson Zalel might have been born earlier. The tombstone gives his age as 90 years. Yeah, they're pretty wild, some of the inconsistencies in the sources about people. I suspect that by the time that he died, the surviving members of his family didn't know much about him. He had 3 marriages, no children by one marriage. A child, she probably died in childbirth, and the child died in the second one. He married a third, and then at quite an advanced age, had 3 or maybe 4 children from memory. But I suspect that they didn't know too much about him when they ordered the inscription of the gravestone. I think what he said in his naturalization application in the early 1850s is more likely to be correct, but there's no guarantees in these things.
I think that's the only question.
There was a comment from Carol from Berlin. Hi, Carol. Thanks for tuning in. And who else? Fabulous slides. Yes. And thank you to Louisa, who was the one who's done the presentation for me quite brilliantly, I think. Now, so next we've got, sorry, I must rush.
Yeah, there's no.
Oh, yeah, sorry, somebody in Israel. Yeah.
Yeah.
Any other questions? Comments? I mentioned this, that an important source in this family history from Liverpool, these are not the only families from Liverpool. The Levis ought to be doing this kind of research on their family too. A brother of Nathaniel and no, wait a moment. And Godfrey, who I mentioned, if you could go back to that connection, the first family one, please.
Godfrey Levy.
Yes.
Just
if you can
I'll
get that up.
I will.
Yeah.
Miriam.
Miriam marrying Godfrey Levy. Not only is she a sister of Nathaniel Levy, but there was, I think, an Alfred Levy who also immigrated to Victoria. And he's a family interest in this sense that at the time of baby Carolyn's marriage, the eldest child of Elias and Sarah Amelia, when she married, the wife of that Alfred Levi gave her, I think, 2 family photo albums, and they are the source of our photographs of Elias Coppel that I used earlier, and much else. Before I was given these albums by Shirley Butter some years ago, I wondered if, in fact, there were ever any photos of Elias Coppel, whether he had some kind of superstition about it, but clearly not. I think it's unmistakable from the context of the album that is Elias Coppel. So that was a gift to her dear friend from the wife of Alfred Levi, whose wife I think was a Benjamin. Now, there are going to be, for people who are descended from the Levi family in Liverpool, there is lots to be got. And I'd like to make an appeal for anyone who can read the cursive Hebrew inscriptions, and perhaps, Louise, you could go back to one of those. Maybe the wedding one will be adequate.
Oh, the first wedding?
The double wedding. Oops, you just
The
went.
double wedding. Yeah, all right.
There we are. On the left, the cursive Hebrew is, I haven't discovered anybody locally here who is able to deal with that. If there's anybody present who themselves or knows somebody who can read this cursive Hebrew script, and we'd be prepared to help out with some more transcriptions for me of these, I'll be immensely grateful, because I've trespassed on the kindness of Saul Mark so much in all of this that I fear that he's gone into hibernation now. If he's listening in, Paul, my apologies. Apart from anything else, it would give us the Hebrew name of Sophia, and that would be an interesting one to speculate about in relation to the family trees of the two families.
Chat's at the bottom there from.
Oh, yes. Thank you for the comments. Very old Hebrew script, sadly outside my area of expertise. There's Michael.
Michael also asked.
Michael Abramson. I'd need a clearer Rodney, if you, I'm not sure if I've got your email, but if you could send an email to me, would happily send you a sample one and see how you go on. I'll send you Sophia. If you can do it and you are willing and able, I would be grateful for some others as well.
Charles Coppel at me.com.
Charles Coppel at me.com.
I'm just putting it in the chat.
Putting it in there. So there you go. That's my email address for anybody else who wants to get in touch. But I do hope Rodney or anybody else who can help, or suggest somebody who can help, who might be willing to do it. It should be helpful to have the English page as well, and I'll always supply that too, although it's a bit of a crib. And it doesn't, the Hebrew names, of course, can be very different from the anglicised ones.
Is there anyone else with a question before we thank Charles for his presentation?
Thank those who came in from far afield, Maimuna from Kuala Lumpur and Carol from Berlin, and also somebody who I didn't know from Israel. There may be others here. The Malaysian one, Maimuna Aminuddin, also known as Marilyn, who's had an article published in the Journal of the Society, and also has Ballarat Jewish connections.
Yeah, she was Australian originally, was she not?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much indeed, Charles. There's a huge amount of work in that. I know it hasn't simply all been done for the benefit of this presentation, but it's been very useful from our point of view to witness the amount of research. I don't know how long you've been researching the.
Well, it's been digging away at it for 20 years, so haven't they?
Well. Yes, it's a bit like the other side of the family, the Abraham side of the family, which has extensive. I know Pat's been digging away at that for 20 years too. So, probably, are we likely to see a book or an article or something in relation to the Berrick family of Liverpool?
Well, I'm proposing to submit a fleshed out article for the journal on the basis of tonight's talk.
Thank you.
That'll be fleshed out with relevant references and footnotes, and enlarging on a few points that I didn't have the time to get to this evening.
Yes, thank you very much. Well, look, on behalf of everyone, can I thank you for this presentation? A huge amount of work has gone into this, and we look forward to seeing what comes out of it by way of an article. It's a fascinating exercise that obviously you can go on for as long as you can go on for, because you're never going to get to the end of it, and it's extremely impressive to see a professional historian effectively who's been right into the family roots of the Berrick family of Liverpool. So on behalf of everyone here, Charles, thank you very much indeed for your presentation, and thank you for roping a large number of relatives into the attendance. I think we ended up with, I think, 35 at some point. David will have the count on it, but we ended up with a good audience, and it was well attended, and it's been very entertaining. So thank you very much indeed, and thank Louisa, who's sitting on to your left, obviously, and manipulating the.
And I thank Pat also for doing the family trees for me on this.
Yes.
Okay. Well, thanks everybody for turning up.
Yes, thank you very much.
Yeah.
Most people are on mute, so the clapping is. The clapping is symbolic. Thank you very much indeed, Charles.
Thanks, Dad. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks.
Thank you, David.
It was 40 people all up.